Hello, and welcome to a video on factoring with four terms, which we will learn that is called factored by grouping. So in previous lessons, we learned how to factor out a monomial or one term. So for example, here's what an example looked like yesterday. Looking at a 10, a 2, and a 2, GCF would be a 2. When you're looking at your variables, we can take 1x away from each of them. So 2x would be your GCF. And then I'm going to have my parentheses with my three blanks. I'm going to divide and subtract my exponents to figure out what's on the inside. So negative 2 divided by 2 would be a negative 1. I'm just drawing a negative sign. And then x to the fifth, take away an x would be x to the fourth. And then we would continue that. So 10 divided by 2 would be 5. X squared, take away an x would be just an x. And then negative 2 would be a negative 1. And then there are no x's with that last term because I took them all away. Okay, so yesterday we learned how to factor out a monomial. Okay, let's look at this problem down here. So I have four terms, and let's see, I have a 6, a 4, a 15, and a 10. I would say a 2 would go into all of those, but a 2 does not go into a 15. So actually there is no number other than 1 that goes into all of those terms, and I cannot take a variable away because that n does not have a variable. So currently I can't factor this problem right here because a 1 is your GCF, okay? So there's a need for another way to factor, which is what we're going to learn today, which is called factor by grouping. So first you should always check to see if it has a GCF that you can factor out like in problem 1, okay? So since our problem here did not have a GCF, it was a 1, I need to figure out a new way. So that new way is called factoring by grouping. So here's what an example looks like. Move my face. So when you factor by grouping, we're going to group things into two things. I'm going to kind of draw a line down the middle. I'm going to look at the first two terms, and I'm going to look at the last two terms. So I'm going to look at these two and see if I can find a GCF. And so I know that 2 goes into both of those. And then out of an x cubed and an x squared, I can take away 2 x's, the smallest exponent. And then I'm going to have my parentheses. I'm going to have my 2 blanks on the inside, and then I'm going to divide. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. X cubed, take away 2x squared would be 1x. And then 8 divided by 2 is a 4. And I'm not going to have any variables with that 4 because I had 2 x's and I took them all away. Okay? Now let me look at these other two terms over here. I've got a 15 and a 20, so I know 5 goes into both of those. I cannot take a variable out because that 20 does not have an x. So I'm going to go ahead and write my parentheses. And I'm going to divide everything by 5. So 15 divided by 5 is 3. That x will just drop down because I did not take a variable out. And then same thing, 20 divided by 5 is a 4. Okay? What do we notice? Well, hopefully you guys notice that this second parenthesis is the exact same, and that will always be the case, which is nice. If it's not, you've done something wrong. Okay, so how we write our final answer, you're going to take your 2 outside GCFs, and you're going to give them their own parenthesis, and that 5 was a positive 5. And then you're just going to rewrite this last term once, 3x plus 4. Okay, and this is our answer. This is completely factored out. Looks a little different than yesterday. Instead of 1 term on the outside, we've got 2 parentheses. Okay. But that is how you factor by grouping. So you look at your first 2 terms, find your GCF, and look at your last 2 terms, find your GCF, and then you will combine them into 2 final parentheses. Okay? All right, let's look at some other ones. Okay. Wait, first off, my bad. I'm jumping to conclusions. First, I need to figure out, do these have a GCF? Looking at a 2 and a 3, I know those have nothing in common. Those are both prime numbers. And then looking at my variables, I'm missing a variable over here, so I do not have a GCF. There is no number that will go into all 4 of those problems, or there is no letter that will go into all the 4 of those problems. So that is my clue that I should factor by grouping because I have 4 terms. Okay, so let me group these 2. Looking at my first 2 terms, a 12 and a 2, I know they have a 2 in common. Out of an x cubed and an x squared, I'm going to take away the greatest exponent of x squared, and then followed by your parentheses. Go ahead and divide like yesterday. So 6 and then x because x cubed take away squared will be 1x. And then I'm going to be left with a placeholder of a 1 because all of that divided by itself will be a 1. Okay, now I'm going to teach you guys a shortcut. So if you know the parentheses have to repeat, let's go ahead and repeat it. So I know that 6x plus 1 has to be on the other side. Okay, and now I'm just trying to find this outside number. And to do that, I can say this divided by this, or you could say negative 3 divided by the 1. So basically, what times 6 will get you to a negative 18, or what times 1 will get you to a negative 3. Okay, and so that ends up being a negative 3. Okay, that's also my GCF of these two terms. Okay, since they both were negative, they took out a negative sign, and they both have a 3 in common. Okay, so now I'm going to take my two outside GCFs, put them in one parenthesis. I'm going to rewrite that other parenthesis once, 6x plus 1, and that is my final factored answer. Okay. So shortcut, if you know this parenthesis is correct, you can go ahead and rewrite it, and then divide to figure out what your GCF is. Okay, that'll help you never get the problem wrong. All right, let's look at some more problems. So I've got 3u to the 4th, 6u cubed, minus 2u squared, minus 4u. Now, you probably want to go ahead and start factor by grouping, because that's what we've done in the past two problems. However, I see that every single one of those has a u term. So I actually need to take out a GCF first. Okay, and so notice there was no GCF in this problem. There was no GCF in the first problem either. Okay, so first question you should ask yourself, does it have a GCF? If not, then you can group. But I do know that there's a u that I can take out of this entire problem. Okay, so let me take away a u from all of these. So I have 3u cubed plus 6u squared minus 2u minus 4. So I just subtracted one exponent away because I took away the u. Okay, so now looking at this inside, there is nothing that it has in common. I can't take another u out. A 2 and a 3, they aren't divisible by anything. So I'm going to factor by grouping with the inside now. Okay, so looking at these first two terms, a 3 and a 6, I know they have a 3 in common. Out of 3 cubed and u squared, I can take away 2 u's. Okay, I'm going to open my parenthesis up, and I'm going to divide. Okay, so I'm going to ignore this u for now. It's going to drop down. I'm just going to look at these first two terms. So let's see. 3u divided by u cubed would be just a u, and then plus 2, because 6 divided by 3 is 2. I had 2 u's, I took them all away. I have u plus 2. Okay, shortcut, rewrite that parenthesis. I know u plus 2 has to be over there on the right-hand side. Okay, so now to get my GCF, I'm going to divide. So negative 2, u divided by a u, or you could just divide these two since it's just a number. So negative 4 divided by a 2 is a negative 2. Let's see if that works out. 2 times a u is negative 2u, and negative 2 times a 2 is negative 4, so it worked out. Okay, or you could find the GCF of these two terms, which is negative 2. I'm going to rewrite my final answer. So these two come into their own parenthesis. 3u squared minus 2. My u plus 2's go into one parenthesis. And now this random u that I took out from the start just drops down out front. Okay, so a little bit more work. If you have a problem that has a GCF, you first have to factor it out, and then you can factor by grouping with the 4 remaining terms. Okay, just don't forget to drop that down at the very end. Okay, let's look at some more problems. All right, this one looks a little bit different. So notice this problem was in order, and by order I mean it had u to the 4, u to the 3, u to the 2, and the u. The exponents were in order. This problem has a 4 and a 3 and a 2 and a 1, but it's out of order. So to help us do this problem, it may first, let's put it in order. So I'm going to take the highest exponent, 11s to the 4th, put it first. Then do my 11s cubed, followed by my negative s squared, followed by my negative s. Okay, so putting a problem in order is going to help us out first. So when I'm looking at this, I see that I can take an s away that has a GCF of an s. So I'm going to do that first. Take out an s. I'm going to have 4 terms to fill in. So if I take away an s, I'm going to subtract all my exponents by a 1. So 11s cubed plus 11s squared minus an s minus a 1 as a placeholder. Okay. So now I've got 4 terms. Let's see if I can factor this inside by grouping. Okay, so let me split these first 2 up. Out of an 11 and 11, GCF would be an 11. S cubed and s squared. I can take away 2 of my s's, so s squared. Notice we've been doing that quite often. Have your parentheses. Divide. So 11 divided by 11 is a 1. So s3, take away s2 would just be an s. So 1s. And then same thing over here. If I divide a number by itself, I'm going to get a 1. I'm going to rewrite that parenthesis because I know it has to be right every single time. I'm just going to try and figure out that front GCF number, again by dividing that last number. So negative 1 divided by a 1 is a negative 1. Double check to see if it works out. Negative 1 times s is a negative 1s. Negative 1 times a 1 is a negative 1, so it worked. Rewrite your parentheses. 11s squared minus 1, s plus 1, and then do not forget to drop down that first GCF that we factored out. Okay? So some common things that have been happening. We have something with an exponent squared, something with a single exponent over here, typically. That's what we've been doing. Okay? And then sometimes you could have a GCF on the outside. So, Ms. Callahan, how can this get harder? Well, they can add multiple variables. Okay, so it's not too bad with multivariables, it just looks a little crazy. So first, see if there is a GCF. So I have an x here, I have an x here, don't have an x there, okay? Do they all have an a? That has an a, that has an a, that has an a, that does not have an a. So I can't take out a variable, they don't all have the same variable. 4 and a 5 have nothing in common, so currently my GCF's a 1. So I'm going to try to factor by grouping. So I'm going to look at my first 2 terms. A 4 and a 5 have nothing in common other than a 1. So if you want to put a placeholder of a 1, we can. Out of an xy and an xa, they both have an x, so I'm going to take out an x. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and change that. No, I'm not. I'll leave it as a 1x. All right, so I'm going to divide. 4 divided by 1 is 4. I had an x, I took it away, nothing there. That y needs to drop down. Moving on to my next one. I'll have a negative 5. I had an x, I took it away. That a has to drop down. Okay? So remember that parenthesis always has to repeat, so let's go ahead and do that. Let me repeat my 4y minus 5a. Now I just need to figure out what will go on the outside to get me back to these 2 problems. So again, you can divide either this term, the 16 by the 4, or you can divide the 20 by the negative 5. Regardless, when you do that, you get a negative 4. Okay, but notice I had an a squared, and then I just have an a in here, so I need another variable a, so that when I multiply those 2, I will get a squared. Same thing here, negative 16 divided by 4 is a negative 4. I had a y, but I needed an a, so I had to add an a on the outside term. Okay. Final step is to write those 2 terms in parentheses. I'm going to change it to an x and then minus 4a. And then I'm going to rewrite that parenthesis that repeated once. Okay, so that is how you factor by grouping with 4 terms and multivariables. Okay, you just got to take it step by step. Step by step, day by day. All right, let's look at one more. All right. We have multivariables going on. We've got 4 terms. First you always have to check, does it have a GCF? So I have a U and a U and a U and a U, so there is a GCF. So before you group, let's take out the GCF. So I can actually take 2 U's away from each of those terms. So my GCF is a U squared. okay? I need to fill in my 4 terms, like yesterday. So u cubed, take away u squared as a u. That v will drop down because I did not touch the v's. U cubed, take away u squared is just a u. Negative 2 divided by 1 out here would be a negative 2. I took all the u squareds from that one, so there are none, but that v does need to drop down. And then over here, I've got a negative 2 that will drop down. And then there are no variables because I had u squared and I took them all the way from that term. Okay, so first step, take out your GCF. All right, now I've got 4 terms. So let's see if I can factor these by grouping. Looking at the first 2, I have a uv and a u, so they have a u in common. I'm going to do my parentheses. uv, take away a u is just a v left over with the first one. And then u take away u is nothing, so you need a placeholder of a 1 because u times 1 is u. Rewrite that parenthesis v plus 1. I know it has to be true. And I just need to divide. So negative 2 divided by 1 is a negative 2. Let's see if it checks out. Negative 2 times v is a negative 2v. Negative 2 times 1 is a negative 2. Works out. Take your final 2 terms, write them in parentheses, v plus 1, and then do not forget to drop down that lovely GCF that we started with. And woo, we're done. Okay? So, this is the level of difficulty that it can get to. You can have a GCF and you can have multivariable stuff. Okay? But that is how you factor with 4 terms, including a GCF and not including a GCF. Okay? Biggest thing is that parenthesis will always have to repeat, always, always, always. If it doesn't, you've messed up somewhere. Okay? All right, go ahead and try the next 3 problems on your own, and then I will throw up the answers and you can check them, and then we'll ask any questions, and then we'll be done. So press pause and try the next 3 problems on your own. All right, look at this first one. You should have gotten 5p squared and then 4p plus 5 in parentheses. That parenthesis would repeat. Notice that these both have a negative sign, so they took out a negative sign and then rewrote them in the right parentheses as 4p squared minus 4, 5p squared minus 4, and then 4p plus 5. Okay? So that one did not have a GCF, so we were allowed to go ahead and factor by grouping. On the next one, there was no GCF. 6 and a 7 have nothing in common. They did not have any of the same variables, so I could go ahead and factor by grouping. Took out a 6u. That left me with an 8v plus a u. Duplicated that parenthesis, and then I looked at these last 2 terms and divided them. So this is an imaginary 1 right here. So negative 7 divided by 1 is a negative 7, and then these both had an x term that was not in the parenthesis, so I needed an x on the outside. So I would get 6u minus 7x. Where I paused that video, but if you have any questions, let me know. All right, last one. This one did have a GCF of an f, so I had to take out the letter f first, and I would get 28fg plus 14f plus 32g plus 16. Then I looked at these first 2 terms and noticed they had a GCF of 14. Took away an f, they both had an f. I was left with 2g plus a 1. So remember, if you take everything away, you need that placeholder of a 1. Repeat that parenthesis, divide those last 2 terms to get a 16. Double checked it worked out, and then take those 2 GCFs and put them in one parenthesis. Take that last GCF and put it in the other parenthesis, and do not forget to drop down that final f. Real quick, I don't think I talked about this. You can have them in any order. So if you want to have 2g plus 1 first, and you want to have 14f plus 16, totally fine. So in any of these problems, your parentheses can be flip-flopped. The reasoning being is 2 times 3 is 6, and 3 times 2 is 6. Order does not matter when you're multiplying. Okay? All right. That is factoring with 4 terms called factor by grouping. So feel free to practice now, and thanks for watching, and have a wonderful day.